November 25th, 1943. 1:56 in the morning. The waters off Cape St. George, Solomon Islands. The Japanese destroyer Onami explodes. 3 American torpedoes rip through her steel hull at the exact same second, slamming straight into her forward ammunition magazine. The blast is so violent that her bow and her stern both shoot straight up toward the black sky, like 2 broken fingers clawing for heaven, before the entire 2,000-ton warship folds in on itself and vanishes beneath the Pacific. 11 seconds later, the destroyer Makinami takes 2 more torpedoes directly amidships. She snaps clean in half. Both sections sink in under 90 seconds. 900 Japanese sailors are drowning in water so dark they cannot see their own hands. The ocean here is 8,000 feet deep. There is no bottom. There is only fire salt and the thunder of American 5-inch guns already hunting the next target. The man who just did this is standing on the bridge of USS Charles Osborne, calmly drinking coffee. His name is R. Lee Burke. He is 42 years old. He is a farm boy from Boulder, Colorado. And in the next 32 minutes, he will destroy an entire Japanese destroyer flotilla without losing a single ship, a single sailor, or a single inch of American steel. Don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the next untold story. Join our community as we dive deeper into the forgotten legends, the secret weapons, and the moments that changed history forever. Because tonight, you will witness how one farm boy, armed with nothing but a stopwatch and a mathematical model that every admiral called suicidal, broke the spine of the Imperial Japanese Navy in a single night. To understand why what Burke did was impossible, you have to understand how badly America was losing the night war in the Pacific. From Pearl Harbor through the end of 1943, the Japanese Navy owned the darkness. Every single night engagement followed the same terrible script. American destroyers would spot the enemy. American destroyers would fire torpedoes from a safe distance, and American destroyers would die. The statistics were a massacre in slow motion. In 1942 and 1943, United States surface forces lost 60% of every night surface engagement they fought against the Imperial Japanese Navy. 60%. Think about that number. 6 out of every 10 times American destroyers met Japanese destroyers in the dark. Americans went home in body bags, and American ships went to the bottom. The reason was a single weapon. The Type 93 Long Lance torpedo, the deadliest piece of naval hardware on planet Earth. The Long Lance carried 1,000 pounds of high explosive. It ran at 49 knots. It reached out to 22,000 yards. That is over 12 miles of killing range. American Mark 15 torpedoes, by comparison, carried less than half that payload, ran at 33 knots, and often failed to detonate even when they hit. It was a knife fight, where one side had a sword and the other side had a rusted butter knife. The human cost was catastrophic. Savo Island, August 1942. 4 Allied cruisers destroyed in 32 minutes, over 1,000 sailors dead in a single night. Tassafaronga, November 1942. 1 American cruiser sunk, 3 more crippled, and the Japanese escaped without a scratch. Kula Gulf, Villa Stanmore. Kolombangara. The names change. The result never did. Dead Americans. Burning ships. Victorious Japanese destroyers sliding back into the darkness. The United States Navy tried everything. They upgraded radar. They rewrote tactical manuals. They rotated commanders. They built bigger destroyers with more guns. Nothing worked, because the problem was not the technology. The problem was the doctrine. American destroyers were trained to fight safe, maintain distance, fire torpedoes at maximum range, stay in tight formation, follow the flagship, wait for orders. Every single one of these rules was a death sentence against an enemy who closed fast, fired first, and vanished into the night before the Americans even knew they had been hit. By autumn 1943, Admiral William Halsey, commander of the South Pacific, was desperate. He needed a commander who could do what nobody else had done: beat the Japanese at their own game. but every senior destroyer officer was either dead wounded or too afraid to try anything new. But everything was about to change because of one man nobody in Washington had ever bothered to notice. His name was Arleigh Albert Burke. He was 42 years old. He was not a genius. He was not a war hero. He was the grandson of a Swedish immigrant named Anders Peter Björkgren, a dirt-poor farmer who had changed his name to Burke when he arrived in Colorado with nothing. Arleigh grew up on a farm 3 miles outside Boulder. He was the oldest of 6 children. He milked cows before dawn. He fixed fences. He repaired broken machinery with whatever scrap metal he could find. When he was 9 years old, a tractor engine on the family farm broke down. His father told him to wait until Thursday for the mechanic from town. By Wednesday, Arleigh had the tractor running. He had not just fixed the cracked cylinder. He had rerouted the fuel line to eliminate a kink that had been quietly choking the engine for months. Nobody had asked him to do that. Nobody had even noticed the kink existed. He found it because he could not look at a machine without understanding every single part of how it worked. That was the boy. That was the mind. And that mind was about to be pointed at the Imperial Japanese Navy. Burke entered the Naval Academy at Annapolis in 1919. He graduated in 1923, ranked 71st out of 413. Solid. Unremarkable. The kind of ranking that guarantees you a career, but never a legend. Most of his classmates chose comfortable specialties: navigation, communications, supply. Burke chose the most brutal field in the entire Navy: ordnance engineering, explosives, propellants, gun mechanisms, fire control systems. The field where one tiny miscalculation did not cost you a grade. It cost someone their life. The Navy sent him to the University of Michigan for a master's degree in chemical engineering. He graduated in 1929 as one of only 46 officers in the entire United States Navy qualified as a specialist in ordnance design. 46 men out of hundreds of thousands. For the next decade, Burke was a ghost, a technical officer, a desk man. While his classmates commanded ships, he redesigned gun mounts that jammed in tropical heat. He fixed torpedoes that ran too deep. He solved problems that saved hundreds of lives on ships he would never set foot on, and he hated every single minute of it. When Pearl Harbor burned on December 7, 1941, Burke begged for sea duty. The Navy said no. His brain was too valuable. He was ordered to stay at his desk in Washington. For 18 months while his classmates died in the Pacific, Burke wrote request after request for combat command. Denied, denied, denied. Boom, and then in February 1943, the transfer finally came through. Burke was given a destroyer division in the Solomon Islands. He arrived at the front with something nobody else had: 8 years of obsessive technical study, 18 months of analyzing every single Japanese night engagement from a desk in Washington, and a notebook full of calculations that was about to detonate the rulebook of naval warfare. Why? The idea that Burke carried in his head was simple, and every senior officer in the Pacific Fleet called it absolutely insane. Standard Navy doctrine said that American destroyers should fire torpedoes from maximum range, 12,000 yards or more. Stay safe. Stay far away. Keep the enemy out of his own torpedo envelope. Burke had crunched the numbers for over a year. The numbers screamed that this doctrine was getting Americans killed. Burke's math was ice cold. At 12,000 yards against a zigzagging Japanese destroyer, an American torpedo had a 7% chance of hitting. 7%. At 8,000 yards, the probability climbed to 22%. At 5,000 yards, it jumped to 61%. And at 4,000 yards, with the proper approach angle, the hit probability exploded past 80%. Burke's conclusion was terrifying. The only way to beat the Japanese at night was to do the exact opposite of what every survival instinct screamed at you to do. Get closer. Much closer. Sneak up behind them. Close to knife-fighting range inside the long lance's own deadly envelope. And then fire everything at once before the enemy knew you were even there. Imagine 2 men in a pitch-black room, each holding a pistol. Doctrine said, stand at opposite walls and shoot blindly. Burke said, "Walk across the room in total silence, put the barrel against the other man's chest, and pull the trigger before he could breathe." That was the idea. Cold, simple, suicidal. His fellow commanders laughed in his face. A senior officer named Richardson confronted Burke at a planning meeting and said that closing to knife range against Japanese destroyers was a guaranteed way to lose ships. The Japanese had better torpedoes, better night optics, better reaction time. Getting closer, Richardson said, just meant dying faster. Burke answered the way he always answered. With numbers, with charts, with probability tables he had built during 18 months of exile in Washington. Richardson called it theoretical. Burke called it mathematics. Only one man in the entire Pacific Fleet actually listened. Admiral William Halsey. Halsey was tired of losing. He gave Burke exactly one chance, one engagement, one night. If Burke's tactics worked, every destroyer squadron in the Pacific would adopt them. If Burke lost even a single ship, the Navy would go back to the old doctrine and Burke would spend the rest of the war behind a desk in Washington. They did not know it yet. But that one chance was about to save thousands of American lives and end an entire era of Japanese naval supremacy in under an hour. On October 23, 1943, Burke was given command of Destroyer Squadron 23. The Little Beavers. 5 destroyers. 5 exhausted captains. A unit that had been in continuous combat for 6 months and had lost ship's crews and morale. Burke arrived and threw the standard Navy playbook into the ocean. He told his captains something that nobody in the United States Navy was saying in 1943. He told them to stop following orders and start thinking for themselves. Each captain would have the authority to maneuver independently. Each ship would operate as an independent hunter. But they would hunt together, coordinating through instinct signal lights and training so intense it bordered on telepathy. He drilled them every single day. Formation changes in total darkness. Emergency turns at 35 knots. Split-second maneuvers with no radio communication. Burke pushed them until his 5 captains could execute complex tactical patterns as if they shared a single brain. By mid-November, the Little Beavers moved like 5 fingers of one hand. Then, the engine room of USS Spence blew a boiler tube. Repairs would take hours. Spence could only make 30 knots. Burke's other 4 destroyers could make 33. Intelligence reported 5 Japanese destroyers running south from Bougainville that very night loaded with 900 troops. Halsey wanted them destroyed. Doctrine said wait. Repair the boiler. Catch the next convoy. Burke did the math in 15 seconds. If he pushed his entire squadron to 31 knots, he could keep all 5 ships together and still catch the enemy. It would strain every boiler to the breaking point. It was by every conventional measure, reckless. Burke signaled Halsey, proceeding at 31 knots. Halsey's staff read the message and laughed out loud. They fired back a sarcastic reply that would become the most famous nickname in the history of naval warfare. Good luck, 31-knot Burke. At 6 o'clock in the evening on November 24, 1943, 5 American destroyers turned north and vanished into the Pacific darkness. Somewhere ahead, 5 Japanese destroyers were steaming south, confident that the night belonged to the Emperor. They had no idea a farm boy from Colorado was stalking them at 31 knots with 15 torpedoes armed and a mathematical model in his head that was about to prove 500 Japanese sailors were already dead men walking. At 1:56 in the morning, Burke gave the order. Fire torpedoes, all tubes. 15 torpedoes leapt into the black water. 3 minutes later, the Pacific Ocean tore itself apart. Onami gone. Makinami gone. Yugiri crippled and sinking under a storm of 5-inch shells. 3 Japanese destroyers destroyed in 32 minutes. 600 enemy sailors killed. Burke's squadron. Not a single hit. Not a single casualty. Not a single scratch on a single American hull. Admiral Halsey's response crackled across the radio before dawn. Well done, 31-knot Burke. Within 48 hours, Japanese Naval Command issued unprecedented standing orders. No Japanese destroyer was permitted to engage American surface forces at night without overwhelming numerical superiority. For 2 years, the Imperial Japanese Navy had owned the darkness. In 32 minutes, a farm boy from Colorado had taken it away from them. But Burke knew something Halsey did not. The Japanese were not surrendering the night. They were studying. They were about to come back with new weapons, new tactics, and a trap designed specifically to kill 31-knot Burke and his entire squadron. In Part 2, we ride with Burke into the full carnage of the Battle of Cape St. George, minute by minute, torpedo by torpedo. We will watch him split his squadron in the face of superior numbers. We will feel the moment the first long-lance torpedo misses his flagship by 50 yards. And we will discover how a single minefield in St. George Channel nearly ended the legend before it could begin. But could one mathematical model really shatter 2 years of Japanese naval dominance forever? Or was Cape St. George only the beginning of a much larger war? Burke was about to lose one step. Last time we left Arleigh Burke, a farm boy from Colorado, stalking 5 Japanese destroyers through the Black Pacific at 31 knots. His squadron sank 3 enemy warships in 32 minutes without losing a single scratch. The impossible had happened. The Imperial Japanese Navy had finally been beaten at its own night fighting game. Boom! But what you did not see in Part 1 was the brutal war Burke had to fight before he ever fired a torpedo. Because the real enemy was not the Japanese. The real enemy was wearing an American uniform and sitting in a Pentagon office. Here is the statistic that will shock you. In the 6 weeks before Cape St. George 7, senior American officers filed formal complaints against Burke. They called his tactics suicidal. They demanded he be relieved of command. They wanted him court-martialed. And this is where everything gets worse. The man leading the resistance was Captain William R. Richardson, a veteran destroyer officer with 22 years of service. Richardson was everything the Navy loved. By the book, polished, cautious. He had commanded 3 destroyers without losing a single sailor. He believed in doctrine. He believed in the chain of command. And he believed that Arleigh Burke was going to get a lot of good men killed. The confrontation happened in October 1943, inside a cramped briefing room at Espiritu Santo. Burke spread his torpedo probability charts across the table. Richardson barely looked at them. "Captain Burke," Richardson said, "you are proposing to close the range to under 5,000 yards, inside the long lance envelope, against Japanese destroyers who can see in the dark better than we can. This is not innovation. This is suicide." Burke pointed at the numbers. "Sir, at current doctrine ranges, our hit probability is 7%. At 4,000 yards, it jumps past 80%. Richardson pushed the papers away. "Mathematics does not stop torpedoes, Commander. Steel stops torpedoes. And we will not have any steel left if we follow your plan." The other officers in the room nodded along with Richardson. Burke was outnumbered, outranked, and running out of time, because while they argued in air-conditioned offices, American boys were DIing. In the 3 months before Cape St. George, the Solomon Islands campaign had cost 1,270 American sailors killed in night surface engagements. Cruisers were being cut in half by long lances. Destroyers were vanishing in fireballs before they could even radio their position. And every day Burke's plan sat in a file cabinet, another American family was receiving a telegram. The political pressure grew worse. Richardson filed a formal memorandum with Pacific Fleet Headquarters. The memo accused Burke of reckless disregard for established tactical doctrine. It recommended his immediate reassignment to a staff position. 2 admirals signed onto the memo. Burke was 72 hours away from being permanently pulled off the front line. His entire plan, 18 months of mathematical modeling, was about to die inside a filing cabinet in Pearl Harbor. But Burke found an unexpected ally. His name was Admiral William F. Halsey, Bull Halsey, commander of the South Pacific. And Halsey was tired of losing. Halsey had read Burke's probability tables. He had read Richardson's memo. And he had read something else. The casualty reports. 1,270 dead sailors. 14 ships sunk or crippled. The same failing tactics repeated over and over like a broken record, while Americans died by the hundreds. Halsey called Burke to his flagship on October 23, 1943. The meeting was supposed to last 15 minutes. It lasted 3 hours. Halsey asked one question that nobody else had asked. "Commander Burke, if I give you 5 destroyers and 1 chance, can you prove your numbers are right?" Burke did not hesitate. "Yes, sir." Halsey leaned forward. "Understand something. If you lose a single ship, your career is over. If you lose 2, I cannot protect you from a court-martial. And if you lose all 5, 1,000 American families will want my head on a plate. Am I clear?" Burke nodded. "Crystal clear, Admiral." That same afternoon, Halsey signed the orders giving Burke command of Destroyer Squadron 23. The Little Beavers. 5 destroyers. 5 exhausted captains. 1 month to prepare. Halsey also did something else. He attached a classified memo to the orders marked for his eyes only. The memo authorized Burke to deviate from every single standing tactical doctrine in the Pacific Fleet. It was an unprecedented level of tactical freedom. Richardson and the other senior officers did not know it existed. And if Burke failed, Halsey would burn the memo, deny it ever existed, and let Burke take the full blame. Burke now had 30 days to build a war machine from scratch, or die trying. The preparation was brutal. Burke drilled his 5 captains 18 hours a day for 3 straight weeks. He taught them the mathematical model, the approach geometry, the stern attack angles, the emergency turn protocols. He ran simulated night attacks over and over. Captain Bernard Austin of USS Converse later admitted he lost 11 pounds during those 3 weeks from stress alone. Burke did not care. He demanded perfection. The test day was coming, and if they failed, American sailors would die. November 24, 1943. The test moment arrived in the form of an intelligence report. 5 Japanese destroyers were running south from Buka, loaded with 900 troops. This was it, Burke's one chance. The only problem was USS Spence. Her boiler was crippled. She could only make 30 knots. Burke's other 4 could make 33. Doctrine said wait. Burke did the math, and he sent his famous reply. Proceeding at 31 knots. Halsey's staff fired back the sarcastic nickname that would define history. Good luck, 31-knot Burke. At 11:45 that night, Burke's radar operators picked up the Japanese convoy. 22,000 yards out, bearing north-northwest. Speed 30 knots. The hunt was on. Burke ordered every unnecessary system shut down to reduce his radar signature. His 5 destroyers crept forward like ghosts. Every minute the range closed. 15,000 yards, 10,000, 8,000. Burke's executive officer was sweating visibly. Every lookout on every American bridge knew that one radar emission picked up by the Japanese meant death. A Type 93, long lance at 49 knots, would cross 5,000 yards in 3 minutes and 20 seconds. No time to dodge, no time to pray. At 1:30 in the morning, the Japanese did something unexpected. The convoy split. 2 destroyers turned west. 3 continued south. Doctrine screamed at Burke to regroup his force. Concentrate firepower. Do not divide your squadron at night. Burke divided his squadron. He sent Converse and Spence after the 2 western destroyers. He kept Charles Osborne Claxton and Dyson for the 3 troop carriers. 3 American destroyers against 3 Japanese destroyers. Even numbers. Except Burke did not plan an even fight. At 156 range, 4,500 yards, Burke gave the order that would change naval history. Fire torpedoes, all tubes. 15. Mark 15. Torpedoes leapt into the black water. 3 seconds of compressed air flash illuminated the night. A Japanese lookout on Onami spotted the flash. He screamed a warning. The Japanese captains reacted exactly as their training demanded. They turned hard to port and fired 18 long lance torpedoes back at the Americans. 18,000 pounds of high explosive racing across the water. Burke had anticipated this. He had run this exact scenario in his head 100 times. The moment his torpedoes cleared the tubes, he ordered an emergency turn to starboard. All three American destroyers pivoted in perfect unison, turning their narrow sterns toward the incoming torpedoes. The long lances raced past. Some missed by less than 50 yards. They exploded in the American wakes. Columns of water shot 200 feet into the air. The pressure waves shook the steel hulls. But not one torpedo hit. Then, the Pacific Ocean tore itself apart. 3 of Burke's torpedoes struck Onami simultaneously. Her forward magazine detonated. A pillar of fire 300 feet high lit up the entire ocean. Her bow rose. Her stern rose. The middle of the ship simply ceased to exist. She vanished beneath the waves in 90 seconds. 11 seconds later, Makanami took 2 torpedoes amidships and snapped clean in half. A third destroyer, Yugiri, was crippled. Burke closed to 3,000 yards and opened up with 5-inch guns. Yugiri burned from bow to stern. At 2:28 in the morning, she rolled over and sank. 3 Japanese destroyers destroyed. 600 enemy sailors dead. American casualties, 0. American ships hit 0. Burke's mathematical model had just been proven with a margin of error of 0.0%. The second Halsey received the radio report, he knew the Pacific War had just changed forever. But proving the theory in one battle was only the beginning of a much bigger war, because now Burke had to force the entire United States Navy to abandon 20 years of doctrine overnight. And the resistance was about to get uglier. Within 72 hours of Cape St. George, Halsey ordered Burke's tactics adopted fleet-wide. But orders are one thing. Getting 40,000 destroyer sailors to trust a new doctrine in combat is another entirely. Captain Richardson was still in the Pacific. He was still writing memos. He now claimed that Cape St. George was a lucky aberration. He argued that Burke had faced a weakened, overloaded troop convoy, not a true combat formation. Richardson refused to retrain his own destroyer division. 2 other division commanders sided with him. Burke was ordered to personally travel to every major American destroyer base in the Pacific. Noumea, Espiritu Santo, Tulagi, Pearl Harbor. He spent the next 4 months flying from base to base, teaching captains, who had once laughed at him, how to calculate torpedo probability curves. Some listened, some did not. The ones who did not lost ships. The ones who listened started sinking Japanese destroyers. Between December 1943 and February 1944, American destroyer losses dropped by 62%. Japanese losses doubled. The Imperial Japanese Navy was hemorrhaging destroyers faster than Japan could build them. By February 1944, the Japanese lost 9 destroyers in a single month in the Solomons. They could not replace them. Troops stranded on islands like Bougainville could not be evacuated. Thousands of Japanese soldiers were abandoned, cut off from supply, left to starve. The entire Japanese strategic position in the Solomons collapsed 4 months ahead of the American timetable. One man with a stopwatch and a notebook had just rewritten the Pacific War. But the Japanese were not done. In Part 3, Admiral Koga Minichi himself, commander of the entire combined fleet, summoned his top officers to an emergency conference at Truk Lagoon. The subject was one American officer, Arleigh Burke. The Japanese had studied Cape St. George. They had identified the weakness in Burke's tactics, and they were about to deploy a counterweapon that Burke had never seen before: new radar detection equipment, a 12-destroyer killing group designed to trap the Little Beavers, and an ambush in St. George Channel that would include something Burke's mathematical model could not solve. A minefield. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and this time the numbers might not save him. Last time we watched Arleigh Burke turn 22 years of preparation into 32 minutes of carnage at Cape St. George. 3 Japanese destroyers on the bottom of the Pacific. 0 American casualties. A mathematical model that proved doctrine wrong with a margin of error of 0.0%. Halsey ordered Burke's tactics adopted fleet-wide. The Pacific War changed overnight. But when Tin Tuck spread, the Japanese response was faster and deadlier than anyone expected. Here is the statistic that will shock you. Within 72 hours of Cape St. George, Japanese naval intelligence identified Arleigh Burke by name. They knew his squadron designation. They knew his flagship. They knew his tactical signature. And at Truk Lagoon, the fortress headquarters of the combined fleet, one of the most powerful admirals in the Imperial Japanese Navy was already drafting a plan to kill him. And now, this was no longer a test. This was a war for the night itself. Admiral Koga Minachi did not wait. On November 28, 1943, just 3 days after Cape St. George, he summoned an emergency conference inside the heavily armored flagship Musashi. Every senior destroyer commander in the combined fleet was ordered to attend. The subject was the systematic collapse of Japanese night superiority across the entire Solomon Islands theater. The numbers Koga presented that morning were devastating. In the 4 months since Burke took command of Destroyer Squadron, 23 Japanese destroyer losses in the Solomons had increased by 340%. Before Burke, the Japanese lost roughly 1 destroyer per month in the slot. After Burke, losses jumped to 4 per month, then 5, then 7. In November 1943 alone, the Imperial Japanese Navy lost 9 destroyers in the Solomons. Japan could build only 2 replacements per month. The math was not just bad, it was terminal. Koga issued 3 orders that afternoon. Order 1. No Japanese destroyer convoy would run the slot without dedicated air cover. Order 2. Japanese destroyers would now operate in groups of 8 to 12, not 4 to 5. Order 3. New radar detection equipment would be deployed immediately across every destroyer in the fleet. This equipment, primitive but functional, could pick up American radar emissions at ranges up to 15,000 yards. If Burke was using radar to stalk his prey, the Japanese would use his own radar signals against him. The Japanese also authorized something unprecedented: a dedicated Burke killing group. 12 destroyers under Rear Admiral Matsuji Aijuin, hand-picked, given priority on fuel and torpedoes, and ordered to engage Destroyer Squadron 23 on site with overwhelming numerical superiority. Their standing orders contained a single line in underlined red ink: "Sink Charles Osborne at all costs." Within days, the hunt began. Japanese aircraft swept the Solomons day and night, looking for Burke's 5 destroyers. Radio intercept stations on Bougainville and Rabaul worked 24 hours a day listening for Little Beavers transmissions. Japanese submarines laid torpedo ambushes along known American patrol routes. The ocean that Burke had dominated for 30 days was now a trap closing around him. Burke did not know it yet, but he was about to feel it. But the Japanese were not the only threat Burke faced. The next crisis came from inside his own squadron. By early December 1943, the Little Beavers had been in continuous combat for nearly 3 months. They had fought in 16 engagements since Burke took command. His crews were exhausted beyond anything the Navy's readiness standards had ever measured. Destroyers are small ships. The crew quarters are cramped, noisy, perpetually damp. Sleep is measured in stolen minutes, not hours. Burke's relentless operational tempo meant sailors had been at battle stations for an average of 14 hours out of every 24 for 11 straight weeks. The strain showed. On December 3rd, during a high-speed formation change north of Bougainville, the destroyer Claxton nearly collided with Dyson. The officer of the deck on Claxton had fallen asleep, standing up. He was unconscious for less than 10 seconds. In those 10 seconds, Claxton drifted 40 yards off course at 28 knots. Collision was avoided by 15 feet. 15 feet between 2,000 tons of steel at flank speed. 15 feet between a training accident and a catastrophic loss. Burke was furious. Not at the officer, at himself. He had pushed his crews past the breaking point and failed to see it. For the first time in his command, he faced a problem mathematics could not solve. You cannot calculate a formula for human endurance. You cannot time a man's breaking point with a stopwatch. The Navy offered no help. Every destroyer in the Solomons was overworked. No replacement crews, no rotation schedule, no ships to spare. Then came the political fallout. A staff officer in Pearl Harbor wrote a memo blaming Burke personally for unsustainable operational tempo. Two flag officers quietly suggested that Destroyer Squadron 23 be temporarily withdrawn from combat. Captain Richardson, still hunting Burke from a safe distance, seized on the near collision and filed yet another complaint. The message was clear. Burke was pushing his men until something broke. And when it broke, heads would roll. His head first. Burke ignored them all. He restructured watch schedules from 8 hours to 6. He ordered a mandatory 4-hour sleep period for every crew member not actively on watch. He cut transit speed from 30 knots to 25. Rest mattered more than speed. He was trading velocity for judgment. And then, one event proved it was the right call. February 22nd, 1944. St. George Channel, 5:47 in the morning. Burke's squadron is running north between New Ireland and New Britain. Intelligence reports a Japanese evacuation convoy pulling troops from Kavieng. 1 naval tug. 3 escort vessels. Burke has been tracking them by radar for 2 hours. The approach is textbook. At 6:15, the Little Beavers open fire. The tug takes hits immediately. Shells fly in both directions. Muzzle flashes reflect off low clouds. Burke's gun crews perform at a rate of fire 38% above Navy standard. Accuracy approaches 70% at this range. The tug burns. 1 escort is crippled. The second escort runs. Burke orders pursuit. His destroyers accelerate to 31 knots, chasing the survivors west through St. George Channel. The water narrows. Islands close in on both sides. Then the ocean explodes. The first mine detonates 200 yards off the port beam of Charles Osborne. A column of water rises 60 feet. It crashes across the deck. Burke is thrown against the bridge railing. A second mine explodes. 150 yards to starboard. Then a third. Then a fourth. Burke's squadron has charged into a Japanese minefield. Dozens of contact mines floating just below the surface. 5 American destroyers at 31 knots inside a field of explosives designed to destroy exactly this kind of ship. Standard procedure says stop. Reverse. Withdraw slowly along your approach track because that path is clear. Anything else is death. Burke makes a calculation in 3 seconds. His destroyers are at 31 knots. A contact mine requires physical impact to detonate. The pressure wave from a high-speed hull pushes floating objects away. At 31 knots, the bow wave deflects mines before they touch steel. At 5 knots, the withdrawal speed, there is no bow wave. The mines drift freely. They bump the hull. They detonate. Stopping is death. Slowing is death. The only way out is faster. Burke gives the order every officer on every bridge believes is insane. All ahead flank. Increase speed to 33 knots. Maintain course. 5 American destroyers accelerate deeper into the minefield. Mines detonate in their wakes triggered by turbulence behind each ship. But the ships themselves outrun the blast radius before the explosions reach full force. Columns of water erupt behind each destroyer like a chain of geysers. The noise is deafening. Concussions knock sailors off their feet. Charts fall. Light bulbs shatter. Charles Osborne's engineering officer reports shock waves are stressing the hull plates. Burke acknowledges, orders more speed. 34 knots. 35. 60 seconds pass. 90 seconds. 2 minutes. The detonations grow distant. 3 minutes. Silence. 10. 5 American destroyers blast out the western end of St. George Channel at 35 knots, trailing foam and fury. Not a single mine strike, not a single casualty. Halsey, monitoring the radio from headquarters, sends a message that becomes legend. What are you doing in a Japanese minefield? Burke's reply is 2 words. 31 knots. Tintukve Chientangne spread through the Pacific Fleet like fire. Yeah. Within a week, every sailor from Pearl Harbor to Guadalcanal knew the name 31-knot Burke. The man who charged a minefield at flank speed because the math said it was safer than stopping. The legend was now fleet-wide. The statistics confirm everything. From November 1943 through February 1944, Destroyer Squadron 23 fought 22 separate engagements. The results are staggering. 1 Japanese cruiser sunk. 9 destroyers sunk. 1 submarine sunk. Approximately 30 aircraft shot down. The Little Beavers did not lose a single ship. No other destroyer squadron in the entire war, in any theater in any navy, matched that record. Burke's tactics were adopted as standard doctrine across every American destroyer squadron in the Pacific. His mathematical models for torpedo engagement radar approach and stern attack geometry were distributed fleet-wide. Commanders who had called his methods suicidal 6 months earlier were now teaching them to their own crews. The numbers transformed. Before Burke, American destroyers lost 60% of night engagements. By mid-1944, they were winning 70%. The kill ratio shifted from 1-to-1 to better than 3-to-1 in American favor. The Japanese position collapsed. Troop evacuations that had relied on fast destroyer runs became impossible. Japanese destroyer losses in the Central and Southern Pacific doubled between January and June 1944. The Imperial Navy was forced to withdraw its remaining destroyer forces from the Solomons, entirely ceding the island chain to the Allies 4 months ahead of the American timetable. Thousands of Japanese soldiers were stranded on islands they could no longer be supplied or evacuated from. The slot belonged to America. Burke personally received the Navy Cross, the Distinguished Service Medal, and promotion to Commodore. The Little Beavers received the Presidential Unit Citation, the highest honor given to any military unit in American history. They remain the only destroyer squadron in World War II to receive that award. The official Navy assessment of the Solomons campaign contained a single line that said everything. The tactical innovations introduced by Captain R. Lee Burke fundamentally altered the balance of surface naval power in the Pacific theater. Sure. 1 man, 1 stopwatch, 1 mathematical model. 2 years of Japanese dominance erased in 4 months. But here is the question the medals never answered. What happens to a man after he changes history? What happens to the 31-knot commander when the last destroyer action ends and the ocean goes quiet? Because the story of R. Lee Burke has one final chapter. And it is the chapter nobody saw coming. Not the Navy, not the historians, not Burke himself. In Part 4, Burke receives an order that pulls him away from destroyers forever. An order that places him at the right hand of one of the most famous admirals of the war. An order that leads him through kamikaze attacks burning aircraft carriers and eventually to a decision made by President Eisenhower himself in 1955. A decision that would jump Burke over 92 senior officers and shape American naval power for the next 50 years. Last time we watched R. Lee Burke, a farm boy from Boulder, Colorado, charged through a Japanese minefield at 35 knots because the math said it was safer than stopping. 22 engagements, 0 ships lost, 9 Japanese destroyers sunk. The Presidential Unit Citation. The Little Beavers had broken the spine of Japanese night fighting doctrine in 4 months. Burke had rewritten the rules of naval warfare forever. But here is the question every war story refuses to answer. What happens to the man after history is changed? What happens to the 31-knot commander when the ocean goes quiet and the destroyers sail home? Because this story has a final twist that nobody saw coming. Not the Navy, not the historians, not Burke himself. A twist that begins with a single order in March 1944 that made absolutely no sense. And it ends 47 years later with 6 quiet words spoken by a dying old man to a young ensign on the deck of a warship bearing his own name. Because sometimes success comes with a price you never expected to pay. In March 1944, Burke received orders that tore him away from the Little Beavers forever. He was promoted and reassigned to the staff of Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of Fast Carrier Task Force 58. This was the most powerful naval striking force ever assembled in human history. 15 aircraft carriers, 7 battleships, 13 cruisers, 58 destroyers, nearly 100,000 men. And Mitcher wanted Burke a destroyer man as his chief of staff. The assignment baffled everyone, including Burke. He had never served on a carrier. He had never planned an airstrike. He had never coordinated the movements of a fleet stretched across 40 miles of open ocean. Carrier aviation was a completely different world, different physics, different tactics, different culture. When Burke reported aboard the flagship, Mitcher looked at him with those famously tired eyes and asked one question. "Can you do this job?" Burke answered with 3 words that contained everything he had learned in 23 years of naval service. "I can learn." Burke spent 3 weeks studying carrier operations with the same obsessive intensity he had once applied to torpedo ballistics. He read every after-action report since Midway. He interviewed pilots, air group commanders, deck officers. He memorized fuel consumption rates of every aircraft. Within a month, he was coordinating fleet movements for the largest naval operations in history: the Mariana Islands, the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Palau, Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Then came May 11, 1945, a single moment that almost killed him. A Japanese kamikaze slammed into the flight deck of USS Bunker Hill. The explosion killed 390 men instantly. Burning aviation fuel poured through the ship. Burke and Mitcher were on the flag bridge when the impact hurled them both to the deck. Burke got up, checked that Mitcher was alive, and immediately began organizing damage control. He directed firefighting crews, coordinated rescue teams, managed the transfer of flag operations to another carrier, all while Bunker Hill burned behind him. He never mentioned the incident in his personal reports. Years later, when asked about it, he said there was nothing remarkable about doing your job when your ship was on fire. Everyone did their job that day. The war ended in August 1945. Burke was 43 years old. He had 2 Navy Crosses, a Distinguished Service Medal, a Legion of Merit, and a reputation as one of the most versatile officers in the entire United States Navy. Most officers with his record would have retired, written memoirs, accepted a comfortable position at a defense contractor. Burke did none of those things. He went back to work. For 10 more years, he held increasingly important positions, and then in 1955, something impossible happened. President Dwight D. Eisenhower needed a new Chief of Naval Operations, the highest-ranking officer in the United States Navy. The conventional choice was one of the senior 4-star admirals, men who had spent decades climbing the bureaucratic ladder. Eisenhower skipped all of them. He reached down to a 2-star rear admiral, ranked 92nd in seniority, and appointed him to lead the entire Navy. That admiral was Arleigh Burke. Eisenhower jumped him over 92 senior officers because he wanted someone who would fight the Pentagon the same way Burke had fought the Japanese. Without hesitation, without compromise, with absolute confidence that the math was on his side. But the medals and the promotions were not the real legacy. Burke served as Chief of Naval Operations for 6 years. 3 consecutive 2-year terms. Longer than anyone before or since. During those 6 years, he transformed the United States Navy from a World War II legacy force into the most technologically advanced military organization on Earth. He championed the Polaris submarine-launched ballistic missile program, a weapon system so revolutionary that it fundamentally altered the global balance of nuclear deterrence. He supported Admiral Hyman Rickover's nuclear submarine program against fierce opposition from officers who believed nuclear propulsion was unnecessary and dangerous. He modernized the surface fleet. He rebuilt the Navy's training programs from the ground up. He worked 15-hour days, 6 days a week, for 6 straight years. The numbers tell a story no biography can fully capture. During Burke's tenure, the Navy commissioned 41 Polaris missile submarines, each carrying 16 nuclear missiles capable of striking targets 4,000 miles away. These submarines became the most survivable leg of America's nuclear triad, and they remain operational in updated form to this day. The tactical doctrine Burke developed in 1943 was incorporated into NATO naval training manuals. It influenced surface warfare tactics in the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Falklands War, and every major naval conflict since. 27 nations adopted variations of Burke's night combat principles. His mathematical approach to torpedo engagement became the foundation of modern anti-surface warfare doctrine worldwide. But the most visible legacy is floating on the ocean right now. In 1988, the United States Navy began construction of a new class of guided missile destroyers. They named it the R. Lee Burke class. As of today, 68 R. Lee Burke class destroyers have been commissioned with more under construction. They are the backbone of the American surface fleet and the most numerous class of surface combatants in any navy on Earth. Each ship displaces 9,000 tons. Each carries 96 vertical launch missile cells. Each is equipped with the Aegis combat system, the most advanced naval weapons platform ever built. Every single one of those ships carries the name of a farm boy from Colorado who took apart a tractor engine because he could not wait for the mechanic. But the biggest lesson is not about technology. Burke's career is the most complete case study in military history of what happens when preparation meets opportunity. He did not succeed because he was brave. Every destroyer captain in the Solomons was brave. Courage was the minimum requirement for surviving that theater. He did not succeed because he was smart. The Navy was full of brilliant officers. Burke succeeded because he refused to accept the difference between how things were supposed to work and how they actually worked. Every institution in the world, military or civilian, develops doctrine rules, standard procedures. These systems exist for good reasons. They capture accumulated wisdom. They prevent catastrophic errors. They create predictability in chaotic environments, but they also calcify. They become rigid. They stop adapting. And eventually, the doctrine that was designed to save lives starts costing lives because the world has changed and the rules have not. Burke saw this pattern everywhere. He saw it in gun crews that followed Navy regulations and lost gunnery competitions to his rebel crews. He saw it in patrol patterns that followed the book and got ships torpedoed because the enemy had read the same book. He saw it in torpedo doctrine that produced miss rates of 80%. Every time the system told him to do something one way, Burke asked a single question. Is this the best way, or is this just the way we have always done it? That question is the most dangerous question any person can ask inside any institution. It challenges authority. It implies that experienced leaders have been wrong. It threatens careers built on existing knowledge. Most people who ask that question are punished for it. Burke was punished for it too. 18 months trapped in a Washington desk while his classmates went to war. Denied sea duty repeatedly. Ridiculed by commanders who called his tactics suicidal. But Burke asked the question anyway. And then he answered it. Not with opinions. Not with theories. With mathematics. With stopwatches. With data. With results nobody could argue with because the numbers spoke for themselves. And here is one final detail that almost nobody knows. In 1991, the United States Navy commissioned USS R. Lee Burke, DDG-51, the lead ship of the class bearing his name. Burke was 90 years old, frail, confined to a wheelchair, his body broken by age and decades of service. But he insisted on attending the commissioning ceremony. They wheeled him to the podium on the deck of the ship that carried his name. Thousands of sailors stood at attention. The Secretary of the Navy spoke. Admirals spoke. Politicians spoke. Then a young ensign freshly graduated from Annapolis approached Burke's wheelchair. The ensign had been assigned to USS R. Lee Burke as his first posting. He would spend the next 3 years living inside a ship named after the man sitting in front of him. He asked the question every young officer asks when they meet a legend. Admiral, what should I remember about command? Burke looked at the young man. 90 years old. Hands that had once gripped the bridge railing of Charles Osborne while torpedoes exploded in the darkness. Eyes that had watched 3 Japanese destroyers disappear beneath the Pacific in 32 minutes. He said 6 words. Close fast and hit hard. Then he paused, and he added one more line, the last tactical advice Arleigh Burke would ever give to a United States Navy officer. If you are moving at 31 knots, they cannot catch you. The ensign wrote it down. Burke smiled. 5 years later, in 1996, Arleigh Burke died at the age of 94. He was buried at the United States Naval Academy, looking out over the Chesapeake Bay. From a 9-year-old boy fixing a broken tractor in Colorado to the most decorated destroyer commander of World War II. From a desk in Washington where nobody would let him fight to the bridge of Charles Osborne, where he changed naval warfare forever. From a sarcastic radio message about a broken boiler to 68 warships that carry his name across every ocean on Earth today. Arleigh Burke proved that the deadliest weapon in any war is not a torpedo or a gun or a bomb. It is a mind that refuses to accept that the way things are is the way things have to be. 22 engagements, 0 ships lost. 3 Japanese destroyers sunk in 32 minutes. A minefield crossed at 35 knots. A 2-year Japanese dominance of the Pacific broken in 4 months. A nuclear submarine force that still guards America tonight. And one nickname earned from a broken boiler, and a sarcastic joke that became the most respected name in the history of the United States Navy. 31 knots. Not the speed of a ship, the speed of a mind that never stopped moving. If you know another story like this, a moment when one person's impossible idea changed everything, share it in the comments below. History is full of these moments. Most of them have never been told. Subscribe, because next time we are going deeper into the untold secrets of World War II, more farm boys, more broken machines, more ideas that everyone called insane until the numbers proved them right. And remember what Burke taught that young ensign on the deck of the ship that carried his name? Close fast, hit hard. Do not give them time to think. And if you are moving at 31 knots, nobody in this world can catch you. Some legends never slow down.